testing, testing. Okay, that's not working. It is not working. What is wrong? Okay, I'm going to unplug this mic and we're going to just go from the computer.
Okay.
Hello. Well, there's some sign of sound, but it's not that active. What does?
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
Mind technology.
Okay.
That I already do.
You didn't remember?
No. That's a problem.
Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing. Joelle's letting me know that what's going on.
Is he?
Yeah, it wasn't working before. It should be working now. Okay.
Oh, live now.
You're live now?
Yeah,
Okay, do you have an image? You need to
No.
wait for me. Okay.
No. But this is the first, there's another square.
Okay, sometimes it takes like 5-10 minutes. That's why. Well, we have 8 viewers now, so people are trying to see it. I don't know if they see it now or not. There's a good chance that they are seeing it, so I'm going to get out of here.
Well, don't run. It gives him a different face than mine to look at.
That's true.
Did you take my stuff?
Oh,
must
right
have-
here, you put it up there.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's it doing yet?
Nothing yet. Do you want to take the laptop, Lauren?
Yes, please. Okay, Joel says he can see it.
Okay, good.
All right.
Yeah, if he can see it, I wonder if, is that just a Canadian thing?
I'll just check, can you see and hear Ron? And if so, then we can go. Say something, Ron, just, say hi to all the.
Hi, everybody.
Just testing or whatever.
We're just testing. We should be ready in a couple of seconds or minutes.
Here, okay, you're on.
Okay.
And just a second, I don't have volume though. Natalie, can you just check to see?
Volume is
Okay.
pretty low.
Can you make it louder?
Yep.
Maybe it's your computer?
I turned it down so that it wouldn't blast.
Talk?
Hello?
Okay.
Okay.
Go.
Now, am I okay? Can I turn it up here?
You know, no, just.
I don't need to?
You know what Joel
Okay.
says?
No.
It's not just a Canadian thing.
Oh, thanks, Joelle. I was a little worried.
Something like that.
Okay. Hi, everybody. There are a couple of interesting questions that are kind of basically, not basic, but basically involved with what we see every day in our lives, and what we engage with every day in our lives, because we engage with ourselves as well. So here's a question from Marie-Josée Perrier in Kingston. Knowing that as individuals that are imperfect, how to be at peace, can we be at peace with the sense that some individuals seem to get away with not being responsible, lie, and have no integrity? Why does God allow that? Okay, now I'm going to try and turn this into a different way of seeing this, because Catherine Stewart from Vancouver was wondering if you can tell me the truth about attachment. And in my view of seeing this, they kind of go together. First of all, when any individual, I don't care who it is, engages with life, it's true that they're imperfect, meaning they can't comply with an idea that anyone has about how they should act. It's impossible. No one can act out how someone else wants them to act, because it's not in them to do so. What has to happen is the individual themselves has to see what's going on inside themselves and become aware of how others act and recognize whether they like the way others act, and then see that they're actually acting out very similar to others, but in a different way. This is very hard. It's kind of an old adage that the Buddhists talked about in 500 BC, that the Hindus talked about in and around the same time, and Lao Tzu and Confucius talked about the same time, and around 2000, or actually zero, that Christ talked about. And the old concept is really a fairly basic one, and it becomes just something people talk about all the time. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Or don't do unto others what you don't want anyone else to do unto you. That's really interesting, because the relationship that you have then is, you have a double question. Number one, you can only see, normally, you can only see what others do, because our conscious awareness is geared for that. It is geared to allow oneself to survive any individual scenario or collective scenario that happens to be involved, or your proximity, whatever that may be. And then you naturally and normally validate a sense of hurt or a sense of nervousness and fear about others acting out in a particular manner. And there's some justification to this, without any doubt, because of the bias that we all have around our own personal safety, our own personal relationship with how a person might be able to function but cannot function that way all the time. The last part is harder, because you, as an individual, do not function perfectly all the time. It's a dilemma. So what in heaven's name, using Marie-José's God principle, what in heaven's name would be significant about others acting out in a manner that might be hurtful to you? Well, there is one very profound thing from my perspective. It is really important. And it aligns with an old question by, and I wasn't going to go into this one, Catherine, that you had about using reality as a mirror at one particular point in time. You sent that as a possible question. The idea is that as conscious awareness increases, you can observe your own reaction to an environment that is different than the one you would rather have playing at the time of that difference. You'd prefer that the situation wasn't the way it was, for example. Reality, though, that is a reality. That is how it's working. And it allows you a moment of reflection that can deepen your relationship with understanding not only humanity, but you as an individual. So, if you can say you have never lied, you have never acted in a manner that you wish you had not acted, if you can say that you had never engaged with life, even unconsciously, that you regret, perhaps you could say you're unattached to whatever you do. But if you react, you're attached to your reaction. In the old Eastern manner, there's a great conundrum. You can become more spiritual if you are unattached. It is spoken out consistently. So people annihilate their friends and people take off from their families just based on the concept of attachment, especially in and around the ages of 55, 60. They want to become spiritual. And they legitimately, sincerely do this for a purpose inside of them. That disengagement, even if it is a misunderstanding, puts them in a position that allows them, from their fundamental way of seeing things, a space within themselves where they are actually outside the idea of needing to be attached for the purpose of looking after family, for example. One case in point I remember really well in India. A gentleman had left his family when he was roughly about 50, 55 years old. I forget the exact age, but nonetheless he did. And he was a jeweler, and a tremendously able jeweler, very financially settled, no problem with any kind of money. He had a son and a daughter and a wife. They were in their 20s. So he said now it's time for him to move into the realm of the spiritual world and try and engage with higher states. And of course, it meant he would go, in this case, up to Rishikesh in India, and meditate and engage the best he could with higher states, which he did, by the way. He even, over time, about 10, 15 years, got a little bit of, after the stores were closed, there was a little bit of a storefront, and all the sadhus who are trying to do the same thing recognized that he was a very intriguing, interesting gentleman, and he was sincere, and he had a breakthrough. He was able to engage with a deeper level, and a tremendous amount of energy moved through him. One aspect of his engagement to the top of his head, and he was fundamentally recognized as a spiritual being. He really didn't engage with any of the sadhus, but they all knew him, and they respected him. And when he had this breakthrough, he went back to visit his family. You see, there's a rule that if you have a breakthrough and you move into a higher state, then your wife is automatically guaranteed a position in the higher worlds. Well, he went back to tell her that she automatically had a position in the higher worlds. I don't know if you'd call that still attachment, but nonetheless, that's what he did. He got back into Delhi, told his wife and his son and daughter that he'd broken through. And they said, well, go back. We don't want any part of you. We don't think this is such a hot idea. We're happy doing these things. And of course, they thought he wanted to come back into the family and take over and get money from them, because money had become their focus. Nothing negative, it's just they didn't want to split the deal with anybody else, even if he was the one that really initially developed all this stuff. Well, he said, no, you don't understand. I just come back to tell you. I'm going back now because I will move into another state and I will die in this process of movement into the next state, because he knew this. He was told that this would occur. He was doing what he was doing out of kindness and respect for a law or a rule that was consistently around in the Hindu principles. He went back. I met him after this particular time. He was very consciously aware of energy in and through the systems. And he was preparing to move into a different state. And that's exactly what he did. He moved into this different state, and he died during that activity. Now, that activity was pretty high state. If he was not somewhat attached to moving into a higher state, would he have been willing to overcome the human concept of wanting not to move into that, what we call death state, which is really not a death state at all, because it's a universal state that relates to continual interaction with these planes so that we can continue to grow. That is a realm or an aspect of attachment. Purposeful engagement with higher states. Extremely important from the Hindu orientation. Watching this individual go through what he did teaches you about humanity, which is not always the same from person to person. Not every family would kick out the principal breadwinner without giving him a chance to explain what he was there for. But nonetheless, that does happen in life. Even a simple story like that is important because we can actually observe these expressions of life and not necessarily agree with them, but perhaps become more conscious of the subtleties that lie within us and move to attempt to soften down our relationship with what we believe is true and real and important and with great value, just because they come out of our background's version of rules and regulations. One of the principles of higher states is, or one of the hopes of a higher state, one could say, that's why I use principles, is that we can learn from what we have around us, understand that we will not be perfect. Perhaps others will learn from our imperfections. Perhaps we'll learn from theirs. But we get a little mixed up in these things. And we attempt to restrict our relationship with the concept of personalizations. What we speak is more valid than what someone else does. Our actions are more right than somebody else. They're more true, one could say, Catherine. Not necessarily. That's why the importance of listening and watching becomes exceedingly valuable, and the cultivation of more than one reflexive mind, one emotionally focused concept related to our iconic personalities. How important then are options? At a higher state, there is a definite quiet in the brain cavity. It doesn't stop the emotional reflex from occurring, but it may help the observation of the emotional reflex, not to negate it, but to recognize it and know that it actually occurs. This is very difficult for us. Even the idea of having a quiet mind is really difficult. Although you can read books about it, and none of them explain it, but you can read it, and people try to explain it. If it occurs to you, there's a definite response initially that would make you very nervous. I watched it happen to one individual who was very able, and he was massively nervous about the fact that it had occurred. He had nothing in his head. He had a brilliant mind, extremely able to express eloquently materials that he had ruminated about, and with some delight came up with ideas that were quite interesting and very helpful on the levels that we engage with every day. But when his mind went quiet, it was extremely disturbing, and rightly so. The recognition that the quieter mind can observe more, in other words, become helpful in the increased conscious awareness, in other words, becoming increasingly aware of the unconscious as it occurs through you, and making friends with it and recognizing that this is part of you, as opposed to trying to negate or hide from it. And then you have the possibility of not always using the same tactics when you're engaging with life that you have been literally unconsciously trained to use, and they've worked really well. So there is a maintenance contract. You don't ever want to let them go. Yeah, that's true. It just happens that way. But when you're watching other people do exactly the same thing, but in a different way, you begin to realize that you will have reactions. And sometimes you cannot do anything about what other people do. And sometimes they can't do anything about what they do. You just imagine how difficult it is for you to be hooked into something that you can't stand yourself doing. And you're so uptight, you can't allow yourself to soften down enough to negotiate with yourself about the importance of the icon that you hold so dear. And it is only a figment of the concretization of the imagination that you've had from the time of your birth. Nothing negative with this. It's how we all engage with life. When you're looking at the idea of seeing others, Marie, your trick might be to learn how to calm down and recognize that adjustments on your part are more helpful to you than being angry at them. Boy, this is tough. Because angry at them is first cause. It's causal. It also validates you as an individual. It does the rest. It does the same thing with all the rest of us. Everyone. So learning how to soften that down, and sometimes getting into a situation where you can do nothing about the environment that you're in. You sometimes have to change environments. And this is not comfortable. But you have to be the one to make up your mind about that one. And that is called, oh gosh, or I think in alignment with relative truth. Oh my goodness. We have so many relative truths. Consider the possibility that if you're in a room with a number of people, don't make it too large because you never get through a whole bunch of them, maybe 4, 5, 6 people. And you get talking about ideas. And someone says, well, I have an idea about that, and they speak it out. For the first, at least, period of time, how long, that just depends on the people in the room, everyone is reacting to the same initial engagement, initial so-called telling of a truth, personalized truth, of course. It's a relative truth, just as valued as any other truth. And if you watch closely, people would add, as they begin to speak about things, they add to other people's things. And eventually, you'll even hear people saying the same thing in different words. Oh, no, I don't think that's a good idea. This is what I think. And say the same thing. Different words. The trick is to know that that occurred. And to understand that humanity is there in relationship to recognition. Everybody wants to be a part of humanity. A strange thing to say out loud to a spiritual group of people. But when you're looking at it from a different perspective, There are so many different ideas about so many different things in humanity. It doesn't mean they're actually all true, even if they're called truths. Great degree of difficulty in relationship to understanding something. Coming back to that same adage, how do you understand something so that it makes sense not only to you but to others? You can't get them to necessarily agree with it, but they have to figure that one out, whether that agreement is possible. And if they value the icon more than the idea they're trying to make sense of, if they value their personality and the importance of it more than trying to understand the relationship that they can move into with the idea, as the idea is the important thing, not them and what they think, you will find those 5 or 6 people excited, every one of them, about the idea that's being transformed. The idea that's being transformed, not the individuals who transformed it. It's a very hard idea to get across, but nonetheless, really important. If you're looking at a view that relates to the internalization of growth, of internal development, this is very hard to have discussion about. We get caught into right and wrong, about an idea that can allow you to make some sense of something, gives you understanding about something, and then you try to consider the idea in a fresh view, and if you try to figure out if you can go beyond what you've come up with. When what you've come up with makes perfect sense to you. Even then, asking the question, if I were to see this from a higher state, what would that look like? Now, I'm talking about this as if we're all attached to the personality that we have. This is attachment. We're all attached to the ideas that we have. I've even asked people over the years, and I ask myself the same thing, if you can begin to perceive the energy that comes into you and through you and is around you, for moments, for seconds, even for minutes, you can even forget the personality, because your perception is fully embracing that flow that is around you and moving through you. Until somebody asks you this question, what energy is that? Meaning they'll have an answer for you. Because you're only a personality. And there are rules about what you can perceive and what you can't perceive. These rules may not be as true as what they demand you think. There's no demand at a higher state. Think about it. When we say that a higher state demands you do this and this is us perceiving that we think a higher state must be like us when we demand others be like this or that or the other thing. Us and our own personality. When you listen to people who are really aggressively engaging with you and believing that they need to do it that way so that you can be assured that they're right, how do you respond? 9 out of 10 people will have a reaction of some kind. God, I hope it's not only I agree. It would be nice to hear, let me think that one through. Some of it makes some sense. I'm not sure about others. I don't have the experience to make sense of that one. But the great fear is that you'll not recognize their thought as valued. All of us have this in us. We're part of the human race. We are as we are, but included in that human race. Not to devalue any part of it. In that human race is this universal flow or flow of life, which is engaged with us all the time. And if you can perceive it, it's shocking to realize that without it, we could not engage. Of course, if you can't perceive it, it doesn't exist. Now, that's the personality talking in its defense of its own self-interest. And it has a value. It needs to do that. It's afraid that it won't be recognized as an important individual unless it says that and downplays other people's perceptions. So the concept is, you remember this one, their way of acting is not as good as my way of acting. That's basically what they're saying. My way of thinking is not as good as your way of thinking, or your way of thinking is not as good as mine, all of this stuff. An opening internally engages the mind with a willingness to go beyond what it already thinks it knows. That's different than protecting what you already think is right. That is attachment. In the highest realm of engagement, to allow you to be able to perceive you, also perceive that flow entering in and through you, there is an aspect there that is not attached to you, and it's not attached to the thing that's flowing through you. It is a perceiving, an opening in the mind plane that allows you to know what is there. Currently, in 15 minutes, you can be right smack dab in the middle of a reaction that indicates that you are more valid or less valid than somebody else. That is attachment. Not negative, just attachment. To what? To a process of being able to handle the diversity of life images and attitudes that come in your directions. Nothing is negative there. But it is attachment. So when someone says, "Who is your friend?" I'm sorry, I have to not be involved with you because I don't want any attachments. And they say it with a very important version of reality. It's attachment. Not that deep either, but real for them, not negative. It's a concept that they believe has to be true for them in that moment. And those moments can be elongated for years. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they're right. It just means that's the place where they are. That seems to be a habit worth keeping. It gives them a kind of sense of value. The same as wiggling your ears gives you a sense of value when you're about 8 or 10. This is not negative. This is important when you're 8 or 10. We're lucky enough to be 8 or 10 from time to time in our lives. It doesn't mean we're bad people. We're learning. Slow and easy. But we are learning. At least that's my hope. So maybe in the meantime we can help each other as opposed to singularly attempting to be independently more important than each other. This serves no purpose whatsoever except one: the defense of how you need to be from a perspective of sheer fear of not being recognized as valued. And everyone, from the time of their birth, is valued immediately, from the worst actions, worst people who have real bad actions, to people who really have good ones. Look at the mirror. It's everywhere. Just understand that it's helpful to you. Don't even have to talk about it to anybody. Just say, oh, got a tiny little bit of that in me. Not in that place, oh no, but certainly in a different place. If you're okay with that, at least from one perspective, you're moving kind of in a healthy way because you just admitted that you're okay with who you are and you have respect for you. And it's okay to be a learner. You still have energy moving through you. Flow, what I'll call it, universal flow. Not considered negative or puny by higher states, but considered involved with a relationship with internal growth. And this is really valuable from a higher perspective. Marie, it might be, I hope that was important, and I hope the concept of relative truth came through in that, and even attachment. You know, it's really interesting. I've had a lot of conversations about attachment, especially in the Hindu orientation, with all my trips to India, and it's fairly consistent that people often go on for, a lot of minutes about the importance of not being attached to anything. And even say, I'm not attached to anything. except they're very attached to saying, I'm not attached to anything. But that's not a negative thing. They are working with themselves to, from their perspective, move themselves in a direction so that they can understand attachment differently without negating others or themselves, and allowing themselves to think about something, to recognize perhaps eventually that it is healthy to be attached to something that helps you survive in this world. But to recognize in the background of all of this is a movement towards not being attached to that very thing, but using that very thing, personality, to survive in the world. It's more into the realm of it is a valuable asset when you're living here to be able to know what to do to engage with survival, and to broaden out your relationship with life so that you can deepen your understanding and continue to move in a direction that relates to being able to watch clearer your internal and external movements in spiritual growth and in the material world, both. Because as long as you have a body here, as long as you have emotions, as long as you attempt to think, you may be able to help yourself realize and recognize that those three aspects are created on these planes for survival on these planes by energy that comes from different levels, different dimensions, so that you can function in these dimensions and then move into an alignment with other dimensions consciously. Not only the extensions of the personality, better sight, better hearing, better sensing, but you can use those to understand that your journey is not finished once you have those, or you must let them go eventually, if it's important to do so. At that time, they will just drift away. You'll miss them, but you'll understand that they drifted away for the purpose of moving into a different state, so you can understand deeper your relationship with extensions of the five senses. But you'll perceive through that silent engagement with another dimension, right in these dimensions, for the purpose of having energy flow through you for the help of others. Not based on who you think deserves it, but based on where the energy knows and understands the necessity for a different shift in an individual, including yourself, whether it be in perceptions or just the ability to handle frequency or energy or various frequencies for various purposes. It's about 10 to 8. I could go into another one. I almost did. Just a little bit more in the reality as a mirror. This concept of reality is a little strange for most of us, but in this form, everyone's in the spiritual world would call it an illusion. But in fact, if you look at it from an interdimensional perspective, you're looking at these states because you are in these states, and therefore you must be a reader of these states, which you attempt to do. And we're still learning how to do this. It's not finished. But if you are moving as well into other states, you must include the reading of these states and those other states. Because if you shift into a different state and you can't relate to these, boy, it's tough. Because these states have an impact on you. Not negative, just because it's the nature of these states to have an impact on you. And you are watching that impact constantly so that you can understand more about yourself. Much more subtle, of course, within ourselves than other people. They're not that subtle. Or you might even reverse that and say, other people are more subtle, and you're not that subtle. We're not that subtle. At times that's true. But nonetheless, the business of looking at a reality, the reality that often pundits, sages, mages talk about, is the reality of engaging with frequency only, truly for the purpose of engaging and helping others. That's a relationship with higher states. Prior to that moment and during those moments, you're also showing your relationship with you. There's always a tendency to become very valued somehow because this is occurring. But there's a whole world of misunderstanding and understanding that needs to be attended to when these early stages of engagement with energy occur. You can watch, you can sense, you can listen to tones, you can listen to voices, you can hear voices of others. You can hear when their stories are of great value to them. You can hear when they're afraid and acting as if they're not. And they are important and their ideas are the only ones. They're fear-based. They're really afraid they won't be accepted for a certain value. And they consider others who don't engage that way to be of less relevance. Not true at all. Their reality is okay, but it's skewed in that direction. So that the importance of the individual is very, very underlined. Not a negative thing, in my view, but really important to notice. Because as you become more able, there will be a little bit of elevation that occurs. It's important, if you've seen it in others, because of their fear and nervousness, it's important for you to see it in you. Not devalue you. Just see it. Ouch. Okay, saw it. That's as much as you need. And recognize it the best you possibly can. And continue on. It's a journey. It's like creating a wormhole. I mean, in the ground, not the one up in space. I think the one in space might be interesting, except for one little tiny detail. We find that maybe it might be closed at the other end. Might be hard to get back out. I wish everybody a really good evening, and Thank you very much for listening. Good night.